To begin, a quick clarification. While the title of this video is The Worst Story in Gaming, you can go ahead and add the qualifiers, that was part of a commercial release, and that I have played. While there are many, many utterly terrible stories out there from countless Neil Breen-level auteurs, I can only confidently speak to the games I have played. And of the games I've played, it would be unfair to go after the free, non-commercial games when the big guns of the industry are right there. So, game stories. For many people, a game story is just a framework to hang gameplay on. A fleeting curiosity to add flavor to the world. And for many games, that's definitely the intended level of engagement. Some games, though, go for it, putting the story front and center to great effect. You've got your Edith Finches, your Wander Songs, your Lisas. Hell, even some of the Telltale games can arguably be said to have achieved greatness on the backs of their stories. In evaluating a game's story, there are a number of factors to consider. First and foremost are a game's characters and character arcs. Mass Effect 2's primary plotline, ending the threat of the Collectors, has so little impact on the series' third installment, you would think it was written by Rian Johnson or something. Whole story beats are put forth and never paid off anywhere in the series. Despite this, it is considered one of BioWare's better written games, entirely on the strength of its character writing. It is especially notable when a character actually changes to the point where they come to new realizations and make radically different decisions.
I made a mistake! Focused on big picture. Big picture made of little pictures. Too many variables. Can't hide behind statistics. Can't ignore new data. My responsibility.
In my estimation, more than any other factor, characters elevate game stories, particularly when they create emotional reactions within the player. Beyond characters, a game's setting is also crucial. For some games, the setting itself is the story, be it a particularly effective framing device or a lovingly crafted world. For example, I don't think many would consider the characters of various events in Stellaris as particularly notable, other than the Worm, I suppose. However, I would still hold Stellaris up as an example of a well-written game because of all the color added by the events and their many imagined worlds they create by implication. As one might expect, plot is also important to a good game story. The plot should gradually draw you into the world, establish stakes, and keep you engaged, whatever the story might be. The story should avoid excessively contradicting itself, as that can lead to the suspension of disbelief being broken. Plot, I would say, is done especially well in the Witcher games, generally speaking. Yes, I know, generally is doing a lot of work in that sentence for some parts, but still. Tone is an easy element to forget about, until it slaps you in the face, be it an extremely out-of-place quip, or other out-of-place dialogue that doesn't line up with recent events in a game. A serious game can have moments of levity, of course, but I don't think Spec Ops: The Line would have benefited from zany hijinks involving banana peels and pies to the face. Quite the contrary, Spec Ops' seamless tonal shift from the professional military angle it starts with, to what it becomes in the end, is perhaps the greatest accomplishment in the story it tells. Something unique to games is that they have the opportunity to involve gameplay in the story. This can take many forms, both depending on the kind of game and the kind of story that is being told. A genius example of this kind of ludonarrative harmony can be found in Call of Juarez Gunslinger. The framing device of the game is that it is being told by an extremely unreliable narrator in a saloon. This is used to great effect in many areas, where the narrator quickly retells certain parts of the story when he is corrected on details, having you go through a level again with significant differences. In another part of the game, he gets up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the story, and the game loops you through an infinite set of train cars until he gets back, while the other patrons in the bar argue over how full of it he is. It's genius stuff, and it achieves the desired effect of putting you not only into the Wild West, but a tall tale in the Wild West. Finally, I would like to put forth the idea that a truly great game story is actually about something, and it takes a position on that something. There are plenty of fine, serviceable game stories out there that are entertaining in their own rights, but they stop short of being about anything greater. In my estimation, there are very, very few games that dare to be about something, And more than anything else, I would point to that fact as to why game stories are so disdained in comparison to stories in other forms of media. For example, Tacoma is explicitly about labor relations. Pillars of Eternity 1 is about the role of faith in society, and Arcane's Prey is about empathy and dehumanization. These are just my reads anyway, going into each of them in detail would be a video unto themselves, but I would put to you that your favorite game story is likely to be one that's about something that's important to you, on some level. Anyway, all that said, my distaste for this specific story is an axe I have been grinding for quite some time now, ever since I first played it. This specific story, of all the countless hours I've spent gaming, stands out to me as uniquely terrible. The story I am referring to is in the second story DLC of Bioshock Infinite, also known as Burial at Sea 2, released a year or so after the launch of Bioshock Infinite. The story struck me with just how utterly terrible it was from stem to stern. It is, if you'll forgive the term, unfathomably bad. It is fortunate that the story is so hidden away in a DLC, lest more people be exposed to it. It has about as many all-time reviews as Bioshock Infinite has recent reviews, amusingly enough. To call Burial at Sea 2 fanfic tier writing is an insult to fanfic writers. Fanfic writers, I am confident, have more care for their characters and worlds than what is on display here. But I get ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning. Bioshock Infinite. Definitely not my favorite in the series in terms of game mechanics, or its plot, but overall, the story's a fairly solid B. The gameplay I'd give a C for a variety of reasons, but that's neither here nor there for the purposes of this video. I'll say up front before I go any further that Bioshock Infinite is a game worth playing, straight up. Were it on significant enough Steam deal, like greater than 70% or something, I'd even recommend it. So long as you've already played through the better games in the series, and perhaps Prey, the true heir to the Shock series throne. Before I continue any further, this is your spoiler warning for the events of Bioshock Infinite. While there are a lot of plot beats I will deliberately avoid discussing, it is impossible to meaningfully discuss the story of Burial at Sea 2 without discussing both the core story and ending of Bioshock Infinite. To further clarify, I would like to emphasize in the boldest possible font that I will not be providing a spoiler warning for either episode of the Burial at Sea DLCs. I do not respect Burial at Sea 2 enough for that. While Burial at Sea 1 is somewhat less dire, its existence as a gateway to Burial at Sea 2 tarnishes it by association. Because I am fundamentally of the belief that nobody should ever play Burial at Sea 2, I am, in fact, issuing a reverse spoiler warning. Let me spoil them for you. Do not play them. Right, that said, I'll try to be brief. You are Dude. You receive an offer to rescue Girl, who it turns out is being held in a floating combination gated community / racism factory, but I repeat myself, called Columbia. You travel to Columbia after solving the most dumbed-down possible version of the rocket ship puzzle from Myst by a rocket hidden in a lighthouse. Cool. Anyway, it turns out Columbia is being run by Old Guy, who has very much been expecting you, and is keen to stop you from rescuing Girl. So he orders his loyal authoritarians to super-murder you. And then the game happens. You shoot a lot of mooks, free Girl from her imprisonment, who it turns out is named Elizabeth. You use Elizabeth's N-log powers to hop realities, encounter the intersectional revolutionary movement fighting back against the authoritarians, say what is perhaps the most disgustingly cringe white centrist line in the history of gaming.
The only difference between Comstock and Fitzroy is how you spell the name.
Watch Elizabeth murder the working class leader of the revolution. That beat turned out to be quite the herald of things to come. Blam even more noble revolutionaries fighting for their liberation. Blam even more authoritarians. Fight a literal ghost. Hop back and forth through time. And that takes you to the endgame. So, turns out, Old Guy is you from another reality. Or, to be more precise, you are Old Guy from another reality. The reality with Columbia that you have been in this whole time is his reality, in fact. The lighthouse sequence in the beginning of the game did more than just translating you on your Z-axis. Before you even stepped into the lighthouse, you were brought over to Old Guy's reality by the Lutesses. the inventors of the technologies that let the city float and let people hop dimensions. Rosalind, from the reality you're currently in, and Robert, her quantum brother, who she brought over from a different reality. They became unstuck in reality after their lab was sabotaged by literally the worst capitalist, at the behest of Old Guy, to cover his tracks in securing Elizabeth. Even from outside of the normal flow of reality, they were able to set you up to get back at Old Guy. Oh, also, Elizabeth is your daughter, who you sold to Old Guy. At the last minute, you had second thoughts about selling her and tried to take her back through the reality portal. This caused her to nick one of the end of her fingers off on the portal, which is responsible for her godlike powers. This does beg the question as to how much a person would have to lose to get the powers that she did. If a tiny part of a baby's finger was enough, would a suitably large fingernail work? Would a tiny skin particle? A tooth? Would you get godlike powers if you went to the bathroom in another reality and came back? Anyway, you and Elizabeth murder Old Guy and destroy his plot device which was keeping her powers in check. Elizabeth immediately ascends to multiverse godhood and gains the ability to see and influence infinite potential realities. She then travels with you through time to the point where you and Old Guy's realities branched from, and then proceeds to murder you, him, and by extension, herself, in all of these realities, to presumably prevent Old Guy from founding Columbia. So, there's a lot of questions one can ask about this ending. Like, what are the extent of Elizabeth's powers here? If she is powerful enough to time travel and end the timelines of all the dudes and Old Guys, could she not just murk Old Guy and leave the dude timelines intact? If doing so would cause some kind of terrible reality-destroying paradox, how is that any more of a paradox than participating in the drowning that already ends her own existence? Is there some kind of twinning of realities requiring both to be severed at the same time? Anyway, irrespective of any Looper-style shenanigans, hello again, Ryan. The ending, while it opens up an infinite warehouse of Pandora's boxes worth of questions, does make a thematic kind of sense. You're the bad guy. You've done a lot of bad things even in your actual reality. And based on what you've seen, sure, it makes sense to take one for the team and just accept death to stop American Hitler, even if you're only American Hitler adjacent by quantum happenstance. Incidentally, if you want more clarifying detail on the timeline, I would heartily recommend the foremost Bioshock series scholar, Charlatan Wonder's video on the topic. So that's Bioshock Infinite. Much like Sonic 2006, the game writes itself out of its own canon, tied up in a fairly neat little self-contained bow. The main character's dead, or never having existed in the first place, Columbia itself prevented from existing, thanks to Elizabeth and Dude's self-sacrifices. Or not. And that leads us to the first story DLC, Burial at Sea Part 1. I get why Burial at Sea 1 was made. I really do. Even outside of the commercial need for a AAA game to have DLC, there is an undeniable novelty in revisiting the setting of the original Bioshock, Rapture, especially this previously mostly unseen pre-collapse Rapture, with characters from Infinite sprinkled in. That said, its basic existence still presents a number of irreconcilable contradictions, the most glaring of which is the continued existence of both Elizabeth and Comstock, who I'm tired of calling Old Guy. Elizabeth's existence I could admittedly see something of a case for. Even with her roots and her original timeline severed, her unique quantum state of being could allow her to continue. The interesting question is, though, how many Elizabeths continue to exist in the multiverse? It is unclear, for example, if the vanishing of the other Elizabeths in Infinite's ending signified their destruction, or if they left for other realities. If there were millions of Elizabeths out there, any of which could have interceded during the events of Burial at Sea 1 or 2, then that's pretty cold of them to leave Burial at Sea Elizabeth hanging. Comstock, though, the more you think about it, the less sense it makes for him to be here. Either the preventative drowning was effective, or it wasn't. If the full set of Comstocks was not destroyed then and there, then that utterly undermines the ending of Infinite. Based purely on the information that we are told in Infinite, all the Comstock timelines flowed through the baptism, where Elizabeth drowned him, as a new constant. Introducing outs makes the situation a lot messier and less cohesive, but more on that later. So the DLC begins with you as Dude, or Booker, rather, in pre-collapse Rapture. You have no idea who Elizabeth is as she enters your office. She hires you for a job finding a missing little sister named Sally who you previously adopted. You lost Sally when she was abducted while you were at a gambling den, Father of the Year as ever. Elizabeth is still explicitly in her ascended state and has witnessed everything in the previous game and more. But Booker does not know anything, only having visions every now and again of the wash basin where Comstock was killed in Infinite proper. Anyway, your first order of business is to rob a masquerade mask from one of the local artisans, so you can sneak into Sander Cohen's place, because apparently he has a lead on where Sally might be. After getting the mask, you and Elizabeth enter his weird, eyes-wide-shut commune, where Sander Cohen is Sander Cohensing all over the place. As is his style, he offers to take you to her if you and Elizabeth dance for him. In the middle of the weird, half-unknowing father-daughter dance, he shocks you both into unconsciousness, and sends you on your way in a bathysphere. Sally is somewhere in Frank Fontaine's commercial complex, which was sunk deeper into the ocean by Ryan as punishment for Fontaine's rebellion in the events leading up to Bioshock 1. So you enter the complex, blam some sovereign citizens, find some new plasmids, and make your way across the complex to the housewares department, where Cohen said the girl is. Upon getting to the housewares department, Sally immediately hides in a vent. Elizabeth, upon seeing this, comes up with a plan to close all the vents in the system but one, and turning on the heat to flush her out. I cannot stress this enough. This is her plan, which Booker is notably weirded out by, and does explicitly not want to go through with.
All these vents are connected to the central heating unit. If we close them off and turn the heat up, she'll be forced out through the central exhaust. It's the only exit.
You want to burn her alive?
No, we just make it hot enough to flush her out.
Can't do that.
Look, either we find her, or one of those splicers will.
All right. Where are the other vents?
However, the die is cast, and you're railroaded into going through with the plan anyway. You try to get her out of the final vent, but she doesn't want to go with you, and she summons a Big Daddy to her defense, starting the boss fight of the DLC. Like the handyman in Bioshock Infinite, he's a gigantic bullet sponge that is constantly in your face, and stuns on him only last for the blink of an eye. In the original Bioshock games, I'm positive that stuns lasted considerably longer, and you were able to keep some level of distance, making the fight considerably less irritating. Anyway, after defeating the Big Daddy, you turn up the central heat to force Sally out of the vents. This is as deeply unpleasant as it sounds. She immediately begins screaming in pain, and even as Booker attempts to pull her out, she refuses to come with him. So here's where things go from slightly off the rails to a full-on derailment. In attempting to save this brainwashed girl by pulling her out of the vent, a few things are happening. First, it's triggering your true memories that had been suppressed by reality travel. Surprise, you're Comstock, a version of Comstock that fled to Rapture after failing to kidnap Elizabeth in a way that led to her death. Seeing you trying to get this kid out of the vent is apparently enough to convince Elizabeth that you are still a Comstock, and therefore worthy of death, presumably because the action is so similar to Comstock dragging her as a baby through the portal. So she has the Big Daddy murder you. End of Episode 1. So let's go through the reasons this doesn't scan real quick now. First, going back to what I said earlier, we are told in the course of the main game that the baptism was a required element of Booker's transition to being Comstock. If not directly, then sufficiently thematically. All of the Bookers were specifically drowned immediately before the baptism to completely stop the existence of both Comstock and Columbia. It is a direct contradiction with the events of the main game. How did this one avoid being drowned? An explicit constant in the logic of timelines that we are presented with. The existence of even one who managed to avoid the drowning implies the existence of potentially millions more, rendering the sacrifice in the original game's ending ineffective at best, tragically counterproductive at worst, if it did in fact end Elizabeth's timelines. Second, if Elizabeth had the power to drown Booker across all timelines at the baptism, what's to stop her from categorically preventing this whole situation too? In the DLC, Columbia definitely still exists. A lot of the logs speak of witnessing it through tears and rapture. Elizabeth's whole reasoning of killing Booker at the baptism was to eliminate the root cause of Comstock and Columbia both. Why would she not kill this Comstock in the same way to prevent a version of hers death, or at least to stop Columbia from being founded? Why not stop the situation before it came to this? The answer, of course, is because then the DLC wouldn't have happened. But such a threat is impossible to ignore once you notice it. Finally, the question of Elizabeth's test of Booker here and the potential for atonement. If a person's mind is utterly wiped of the memories of their misdeeds and motivations, do they deserve a second chance? On the other end of the spectrum from this DLC, the Knights of the Old Republic games would seemingly say yes. I suppose the famous Oni plays perfect copy of a dictator thought experiment doesn't exactly apply here, because he demonstrably did do bad things as both Booker's and as Comstock. The kidnapping, Columbia still existing, though Comstock's role in it may have diminished from his leaving, depending on when he did. Regardless, this test that Elizabeth uses here to weigh his soul against a feather doesn't ring as particularly salient, particularly as he has objected so much to the plan, and especially as Elizabeth always had the power to prevent this situation in the first place. It comes off as her toying with the guy, especially as she presumably has the power to see all past, present, and future, making such a test pointless as she can already view the full context of his life from birth to death, which, fine, she's definitely entitled to toying with both Booker and Comstock, as terrible as both of them are, but that context does make what comes next even more difficult to stomach. Hoo boy! Ladies and gentlemen and non-binary pals, please set your tray tables in their upright positions. This already derailed train is about to enter space. Burial at Sea 2 begins with you as Elizabeth in Paris. Not real Paris, mind you, but a Paris she has conjured into existence, presumably inside her mind. It is the brief realization of her dream in Infinite proper. However, all is not well, and in short order it all comes crashing down when she comes across Sally, the girl she had used as bait in the previous episode of the DLC. Turns out, despite her steely exterior during the act itself, she immediately regretted putting Sally in danger. One nightmarish panic attack later, and she wakes up in front of the vent, next to the decaying corpse of Comstock, or whatever the hell you want to call him at this point. She is not alone, however, and in short order it encounters Atlas, an important character from Bioshock 1, who is about to have one of his boys blow her away. Beyond these motley rogues, however, there is also her new imaginary friend, Head Booker. You know how in Battlestar Galactica Gaius Baltar was constantly talking to a woman only he could see? Same kind of thing. Only in this case, Booker is more a manifestation of her shattered memories, most significantly her memories of her time as a quantum god. He helpfully gives her the words she needs to say to be spared by Atlas.
Say, I can get you back to Rapture.
What?
Just say it.
I can get you back to Rapture!
Put the gun down.
She tells Atlas she can get him back to Rapture if he will let Sally go. She pretends to be Suchong's lab assistant to bolster her credibility. Suchong is another important character from Bioshock 1. Atlas finds this amusing and lets her go, giving her a radio to stay in contact. Great. Setting aside my initial problems with the premise, this doesn't seem like the worst setup for a DLC, despite the immense heel turn in Elizabeth's relationship to Sally. Anyhow, after this scene, Elizabeth makes for the exit of the toy department, but a surprise is lurking behind a nearby table. A dead Elizabeth. Well, that's different. This is the Elizabeth who was in Burial at Sea 1. The Big Daddy killed her, apparently. So who are you? Well, you're the last of the Elizabeths. Let me explain. She, by which I mean the collective superconsciousness she here, made the choice to come back to this particular reality where she died, and in doing so, abandoning all of her powers. She is assisted in doing this by the Lutesses, who warn her that in doing this she will collapse her waveform, having her continue to exist only as a normal woman. Turns out there's rules against re-entering a universe where you've died, but despite the warnings, she does so anyway, presumably because of her intense guilt over what she did to Sally in Burial at Sea 1. Critically, after doing this, she also loses any memory of what exactly her plan is here. So, wow, okay. I'm not going to defend what she did in Burial at Sea 1, obviously, but from what perspective does this action make sense? She is giving up the power to change things, presumably in the full set of all realities at once, not even merely one. That's huge. Using what she did to Comstock and Columbia as a baseline, hell, maybe she could even stop Rapture from existing too. That's just the tip of the iceberg though. She could stop an enormous amount of harm all across the multiverse. Solve racism, stop climate change, disarm the nukes, elect Bernie Sanders, whatever. She may not have had the ability to change things as large as all of those, but she surely had the power to do a whole hell of a lot with the tools she had. For an omnipotent quantum being, this is unbelievably goddamn short-sighted. Again, of course, the reason to depower Elizabeth here almost certainly comes down to gameplay reasons, as presumably she could not be her godlike self in the story they had in mind here. Personally, I think a better DLC, both in terms of story and gameplay, would have been one where she retains her powers and has to fight against a similarly empowered final version of Comstock, who nicked his finger off in the portal or something. The potential for a fight like that would have been a real interesting war in heaven. Anyway, back to this nonsense. The first order of business is to locate Suchong, which sets your first primary objective, so you start making your way through the department store. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the delightful set piece in the first part of the level, a preparatory school for Rapture's children featuring the founder of Rapture, Andrew Ryan, as an anthropomorphic lion warning children about the dangers of sharing and why it's okay for poor people to die from a lack of health care.
If I can afford to see the doctor, is it my concern that others cannot? No, says the damnable parasite. We must all crowd our way into the physician's office. Ryan the lion says, chew on that, you parasite.
Given how utterly nothing Infinite's politics were, this is something of a surprise. I wonder if the writers realize just how many people regrettably agree with Ryan's views here. As deranged as it's presented here, the policy of this view is perfectly enmeshed within the current state of the United States healthcare system, though few who support the system, understanding full well the harm it perpetuates, would dare to be so cavalier and forthright about it. Anyway, moving on. The gameplay here is actually pretty interesting relative to the other parts of Infinite. Despite my enormous problems with the story, Burial at Sea 2 actually plays somewhat like a real 0451 game. Stealth is now a possibility, complete with tranq darts and a stealth plasmid, and you can even schlep around in the vents. There's even the requisite resource scarcity causing you to have to make tactical decisions to survive, and there's a wealth of storytelling in the environment. Eventually, you make your way to the restaurant where Suchong set up his lab. There, you find a Lutece device, though unfortunately it's broken. Suchong had been using it to spy on Columbia. While investigating the lab, Elizabeth then sees herself in the future raising up the department store using one of the Lutece particles that Columbia uses to float. Now, throughout all of this, Elizabeth seems pretty nonplussed about Columbia still existing and all. You would think that this would be a big moment in the context of Infinite's ending, but it's not commented upon. Regardless, Elizabeth decodes a secret message Suchong left for himself with the parts he needed to fix the device, so fixing the device becomes the new main objective. Okay. So you stealthily make your way through the department store, collecting plasmids, getting the parts you need to fix the device, and having a Bioshock time of it in general. Eventually, you gather the parts and open the tear to Columbia. Upon quickly getting the needed floating particle, Suchong prevents your return. He demands that you break into Fink's lab and steal a lock of Elizabeth's hair that Fink has stashed there so that Suchong can perfect the imprinting between the Big Daddies and the Little Sisters of Rapture. Fink was able to pair Songbird with Elizabeth, and Suchong suspects some kind of pheromone was involved. Okay, next question. If the imprinting is currently not working, why did the Big Daddy respond to the Little Sister's call in Burial at Sea 1? Follow-up question, is Suchong blind? You would think that he would be able to tell Elizabeth is the girl whose hair he is requesting, given the level of attention he has been paying to Columbia, and even having pictures of Booker and Elizabeth in the lobby portion of his lab. Also in this sequence, Elizabeth mentions the potential for running into herself and Booker, presumably during the events of the first game, which in no uncertain terms means that the events of Bioshock Infinite proper still happened, and are indeed happening right now, despite the ending. Which, if the ending was not the permanent erasure of at least Booker, what the hell was it? Any possible amount of sense it made has now been fully jettisoned by this DLC. Now, for the next part, I bet you were thinking we were done with the major plot points of Infinite. I certainly did, which made the next part quite the shock. Bioshock, that is. You stumble upon the Lutece twins talking to Daisy, telling her that she must pretend to murder Fink's child to force Elizabeth to kill her so that she'd have the strength to kill Comstock.
You've misunderstood us.
We neither asked you to harm the child.
Nor did we promise that yours would be the hand that would set Comstock's world afire.
A famous man once said,
And a famous man shall say,
I may reach the mountaintop.
but I fear I shall never visit the valley below.
But you mean I won't live to see the... No.
It's up to you what matters more.
Your part in the play?
Or the play itself.
Someone is coming.
She'll arrive a girl.
She must leave. A woman.
And what makes the difference between a girl and a woman?
Blood.
Your part in the play.
Or the play itself.
Turn her into a killer? How?
Give the girl no choice.
And she will be forced to make one.
Hashtag Daisy deserved better. Amazing. You can almost see how the writers must have looked back at the whole of Infinite, realized how ham-fisted it was with Daisy, and done this retcon in an attempt to shore up the plotline. In actuality, though, this makes even less sense, in terms of moral clarity or otherwise. In needlessly attempting to rewrite Daisy's justification, they rob her of all agency, which, granted, is a reoccurring theme of the series, but this is just tacky. Particularly the racial optics of her sacrificing herself ultimately for the vengeance of quantum-ass white people who are seemingly paraphrasing MLK to her. Moreover, this vengeance of the Luteces, by all accounts, has already failed. If you're even able to still witness this infinite reality, in the end, Daisy's sacrifice must have been for nothing, as Comstock in all forms must definitionally exist if Columbia does. As if that wasn't enough, you also come across a voxophone where she in no uncertain terms lists out her hatred of violence.
Yeah, there's a war coming. You can smell it in the air. Fear, hatred, people dying every day. But how many more will suffer if we rise up? Violence begets violence, I know this. I've seen this. The rational mind argues for a peaceful solution to find a common ground, but what common ground is there to find for a father who watches his child bleed out in the street? How do you deny him his vengeance? I know that fire that burns deep inside. I know it all too well. And when the time comes, will I be able to stay the hand?
So, basically, they changed her character from an Antifa super soldier to a resistance liberal. Oh, to be a fly on the wall for the conversations that led to this retcon. Previously, Daisy's whole reasoning behind doing what she attempted to do in the original game was to, quote, pull the problem up by its roots, which was cleanly foreshadowing the end of the game, eliminating Comstock at his root before the baptism. Changing her motivation to be an example of a character fatalistically playing their part is regrettably thematically appropriate for Burial at Sea 2, yes, but it is deeply at the cost of the weight of the original game's story, which has all but evaporated at this point. Anyway, immediately after witnessing that scene, you blam some more Vox freedom fighters, because what even is tonal consistency at this point? So you infiltrate Frank's private quarters, admire how much he's trashed his private prayer nook, and take the elevator down to his lab. On the way down to the lab, you see Elizabeth and Booker from Infinite on their way up. At the risk of repeating myself unduly, if the events of Bioshock Infinite in their entirety still happened, then what was the ending? Did it mean anything at all? Anyway, at this point Elizabeth makes the bizarre statement that Booker was her, quote, only friend, and that she misses him.
Booker, you there? I miss you. You were the only one who ever... You were my only friend. Booker.
I'm not even here. I'm a projection of your own.
Could you humor me then? Please.
I think Booker would miss you.
I'm sorry? You knew him for all of a day which ended with you going back in time and drowning him. You were not friends to any meaningful degree. Moreover, he was literally her father, which, as utterly distant as he was from any concept of that during the runtime of the game, he was closer to that than he was a friend. I get that they wanted some kind of moment here, but thematically, again, it doesn't not fit with anything that has come before. Eventually, after navigating Fink's lab of horrors, you find out the truth as to how Songbird was imprinted with Elizabeth, a mystery I can't imagine many people were asking the answer to. Turns out it was just a line with the thorn in its paw routine that did it. Yep, that's all it took. A pretty unbelievable answer given how intensely Songbird took its job. Also, can I just say how weird it is that Songbird is built up to be this huge threat, but in the context of the game, you never fight it even once? I mean, I'm not even saying I demand the right to defeat this thing in honorable combat or anything, but never even being able to try to fight it seems like a missed opportunity. I mean, that would be like playing through Bioshock 1 and never getting to fight a Big Daddy. Anyway, you farcically claim the hair for Suchong, pontificate about free will, attempting desperately to create a thematic link with Bioshock 1, and head back to Rapture. Side note here real quick, in an ostensibly anti-racist game, I'm not quite sure what to make of Suchong's voice here.
Pretty lady put hair sample in tube. Then, business is finished.
I'm not an expert on these things, but that seems kinda not great. After giving Suchong his gamer girl bathwater, surprise! Ryan out of nowhere. He offers you a very straightforward deal. Work for him, or die. You decline, zap his splicers, and hatch a plan with Atlas to float the department store by releasing the particle in Fontaine's office. Notably, at this point, if you diligently get all of a set of optional code messages hidden throughout the department store, you can find a secret room in the Manta Lounge where you can learn Fontaine and Atlas are the same person. This has no bearing on any conversation, unfortunately. It is disappointing in games where you, the player, can find out something important, and not have that something learned by the player character you're playing as. Deus Ex Human Revolution was especially bad about this, unfortunately, which is quite the contrast with the original. So after crossing the battlefield of Ryan and Atlas's splicers, you ride the elevator up to Fontaine's office. Ryan pops in one last time in the elevator, remarking that,
"And now, your misguided sense of altruism sends you to your doom. It's like watching Isaac Newton die in a house fire. A vain attempt to save his cat."
Which, as hypocritical and deluded as he is, damned if I have a hard time disagreeing with him here. She knows what Atlas is going to do to her. She's always known. After she points out where the lift particle must go, she glibly states,
"There's no plan B. Might as well just get it over with."
Her voice dripping with fatalism. So you set the particle, raising the department store into the range of Rapture, igniting the war between Atlas and Ryan. Meanwhile, Atlas's goons gratefully knock you out and drag you to him. Also, note, chloroform does not work that way and has never worked that way. In a world as out there as this, they use the one thing which we know in real life does not work that way. Whatever. So what happens next? Well, it's not pretty. Atlas wants what he calls the ace in the hole, which he desperately needs to defeat Ryan in the war for Rapture. He demands information on this ace from you. As you pretended to be the lab assistant of Suchong, you've painted yourself into a corner here, as you would likely know this information if you really had been his assistant. You're knocked out for 2 weeks by a dose of truth serum in the first attempt to torture the information out of you. I'm not going to look this up, but this doesn't seem like the kind of thing that could happen, and it really seems like a hand wave to advance the clock. Alright, so, this next part. While this is one of the larger reasons I'm doing this video, I'm not going to show it. This is a scene where Elizabeth is brutally tortured. It is inarguably the most graphic first-person torture sequence in mainstream gaming. The scene is utterly repugnant, and I don't mean that in an art that challenges you kind of way. Atlas, in his desperation to get the information he needs, tortures you with an ice pick. You feel each tap as he drives it into your skull, through your eye socket. I hesitate to bring authors personally into any analysis of their works, but What the fuck, Ken Levine? This was your fucking vision for the end of the Bioshock series? Torturing an abused, friendless girl until she is ready to accept death willingly? You sick fuck? Okay, deep breath, let's continue. Fortunately, he does not tap that final tap, knowing that you are too intellectually valuable to lobotomize. However, he immediately switches to threatening to use the pick on Sally. Needless to say, Elizabeth does not take this well. She begins desperately searching for any information she may have known in her godlike state, also decrying the situation correctly as fruitless and pointless. Drawing on her memory, she is able to come up with the answer of searching Suchong's lab, which, no shit, should have been the first thing Atlas should have searched on his own, and even beyond searching her memories, should have been the first thing she proposed as a bluff to buy more time. Atlas then says the most ass-pully line I have ever heard in a game.
That's a bit convenient now. Ryan's got every turret in the place tuned to me and me men's genetic code. We'd be torn to shreds before we got 10 feet.
That's right. Which is why I'm gonna do it for you. You okay with that?
Get me the ace, I'll wrap the brat in a silk ribbon. Bag her and bring her to my bathysphere.
I'm sorry, gene-locked turrets? Gene-locked turrets are stopping you from getting to Suchong's lab. Maybe he hasn't been outside recently, but the turrets in Rapture are basically made of cardboard for how much resistance they put up. And the punchline to all this? There are no goddamn turrets on the way to the lab. I don't know if they just forgot to model them, or otherwise did not care about this little bit of shoehorned-in continuity, but you literally go from the bathysphere where Atlas is straight to the back of the lab, with no resistance. You even see one of Atlas's men there. He didn't need Elizabeth for any of this. So, because plot beat, you come across a damaged Big Daddy and two little sisters in Suchong's lab. Elizabeth pulls a Ghislaine Maxwell and has the little sisters imprint with the Big Daddy by having them save him, as she saved Songbird. Cool cycle of abuse there. Notably, this imprinting event should have happened ages ago in the timeline, and my recollection is that it directly contradicts the timeline of the original Bioshock for this to happen now, but what's one more retcon at this point? Also, side note, how the hell did Elizabeth's hair get here, anyway? It's a nitpicky point, I realize, but I don't believe for an instant the pneumatic tubes between Fontaine's department store and this lab were still working, or else people would have just mailed themselves out to escape. Whatever. Anyway, you arrive at the core of the lab just in time to watch Suchong find out in the most dramatic way that the imprinting process has been a smashing success. Somehow in all this mess, you spot the ace. You know it's the ace because it conveniently has ACE written on it. Great. You open the envelope, revealing the plot point that ties into the events of Bioshock 1, which I'm not going to spoil, any more so than I have already. You walk some more around the lab, and then come to a room with Atlas and his goons. Guess they didn't have much trouble getting through those gene-locked turrets after all. You hand Atlas the ace. You tell Atlas that you know what's going to happen next, and for him to just get it over with. You don't, say, heroically grab Sally and use your stealth plasmid, which you've been using the whole time in this DLC, to escape, which seems well within the range of possibilities. You just hand him the ace, and he hits you. He demands to know how to use the ace, you tell him, and then he hits you again. And then, well, Elizabeth fucking dies. For nothing. Less than nothing, really, as this can be viewed as fridging herself for the benefit of the protagonist of Bioshock 1. If Atlas had to find out the information on the ace from Elizabeth to preserve the timeline, she could have just told him and gotten the hell out of there, probably with Sally in tow. This was not a noble sacrifice. This was an act of needless suicide. Sally certainly isn't getting anything out of this, which was explicitly Elizabeth's reason for doing this. The DLC wants us to take solace in the fact that Atlas will eventually be owned by the player character in Bioshock 1, but we already knew that. That's not a denouement, that's not catharsis, that's nothing. That's just forcing the universes together with a massively unsatisfying retcon.
Andrew Ryan said I was a rube. But he was wrong. I'm not the rube, Atlas. You are. No. We both know what happens next. Just get it over with.
You're so owned, Elizabeth seems to say as she prepares to die due to blunt force head trauma. She dies, and then the credits roll. It is at this point you learn perhaps the most perplexing secret in the entire Bioshock series. Andrew Ryan was voiced by fucking Quark. The video starts playing during the credits, where the voice actress for Elizabeth starts singing a rather disturbing song.
Just remember, darling, all the while you belong to me.
Maybe I'm being dense, but I can't see any meaningful thematic connection between the song and anything that happens within any of the Bioshock Infinite stories. I could, however, see it as the director, Ken Levine, defiantly asserting ownership over the property, or, less charitably, Elizabeth herself. Weird. Anyway, let's go through this thing with the points I outlined in the introduction of this video. Characters. Well, honestly, there is only one character in the entire DLC, Elizabeth herself. The ghost of Booker's past is just a projection of her, after all. Atlas is an utterly flat antagonist. Elizabeth's reason for all of this, Sally, doesn't speak more than a handful of words in the whole thing. What is more of consequence here is Elizabeth's arc over the course of the DLC, her fall. This is in stark contrast with her rise in Bioshock Infinite, ending with her in her godlike state, having utterly erased Booker and Comstock from all timelines, even though this is immediately contradicted by both Burial at Seas, of course. Here, she has a long, clumsy, and painful fall, losing everything and then her own life, for confusing and seemingly misguided reasons. I get that this contrast is intentional, but that does not make it good. Like, I get it, I really do. Burial at Sea in its very name reveals Elizabeth's fate. It was never going to be a happy ending, but this arc is a mess that lacks any of the nuance or sense to make it work. It neither fits with what was established before, nor does it stand particularly well on its own. It is bumbling and violent, much like the Big Daddies that patrol Rapture. The setting. Honestly, the setting is arguably the strongest element here. Rapture feels like a living nightmare run by competing deranged Randian Superman, as it should. It bizarrely actually seems like a place people could have lived at some point, and there's a lot of quality in the environmental storytelling, whereas Columbia feels much more like a total farce where I'm sure a solid fourth of the population dies from falling every month. The plot. I think I have pontificated about the plot enough as is, but again, I will say, it is not an admission of weakness on my part when I say definitively that it does not make a lick of sense if you spend even an instant thinking about it beyond what you are directly presented with. It is clear they had the thematics in mind first and foremost in the development of the story, and that's fine, but to Frankenstein together the two Bioshock series in this way with this little care is disrespectful to the legacies of both. The tone. The tone? Well...
Miss?
Enough said. Okay, I suppose it's a bit unfair to demand the DLC conform to the tone of the base game, but Jesus, it is pitch black. It's definitely consistent with itself, at least. It's rather remarkable in its tone, really, which is much more at home with stories like Layers of Fear than it is with your usual first-person RPG game. Gameplay involvement in the story. Haha, no. If anything, this game has one of the worst cases of ludonarrative dissonance I have ever seen in a game. The game gives you the plasmids and guns to make you the baddest assassin Rapture's ever seen, then proceeds to disempower you again and again in the story. I get that that's needed for the story they want to tell, the utter destruction of Elizabeth, but it utterly does not fit with the game mechanics. I suppose there's something to be said for Elizabeth's melee strikes only knocking enemies back instead of damaging them if you're not stealth killing them, but that alone is certainly not enough to overcome the massive gap between the gameplay and the story. At the end of the day, given her plasmids, she explicitly chose to die. Whereas in the gameplay, she could easily have just turned invisible, throw down an Old Man Winter Blast, or even hell possessed one or multiple of them. There had to be some writer's room debate on how to lock her out of her plasmids left on the cutting room floor, but it's just so utterly bizarre to me that the throwaway line about the gene-locked turrets made it in, but nothing about this glaring oversight. Finally, is this work about something? Hell no, this isn't about something. The closest it gets to being about something is leeching off of Bioshock's primary theme of free will, which was mostly just a meta-commentary on gaming to begin with. This is a slapdash, disgusting torture porn fanfic. There is a universe where a story like this could have worked and been about something, but certainly not handled like this, and with these nonsensical plot points. In conclusion, Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea 2 is an ocean of contrasts. Contrasting with the main game, contrasting with the Bioshocks of old, and in the latter part, contrasting sharply with the boundaries of good taste. While it attempts to probe new depths of thematic grandeur, it is barely as deep as a child's inflatable kiddie pool. With such a complete lack of cohesion, even the most surface-level read exposes how nonsensical it all is. Looking at the Steam reviews for it, I see I am firmly in the minority in my intense dislike of it, but I hope that I have done a serviceably coherent job in laying out my case for why it is, without question, the worst story in mainstream gaming. There are a wealth of quality stories out there. While many deride gaming as a storytelling medium writ large, there are experiences that use that space to the fullest. Even if you consider yourself to be a gameplay-first gamer, there are some real gems out there that would absolutely bring you joy. With modern gaming dominated by games with nigh-on endless replayability, it is a breath of fresh air to play a discrete, story-focused experience that's over in a few hours, now and again. It is a leap of faith, but it is one worth taking, particularly if you feel burned out from the grind. During the creation of this video, I watched NoClip's documentary on Arcane Studios. The segment on Dishonored reminded me of how much the series contrasts with Infinite. Death of the Outsider, too, in terms of story structure, is almost an inversion of Burial at Sea. The whole Dishonored series satisfies in a big way, in fact. It is especially salient as it is hard to escape the feeling that we're living in it currently. So I guess what I'm saying here is go out and play through the entire Dishonored series instead. Bioshock Infinite strayed from the series' roots in a big way. Dishonored doubled down on what made 0451 games the S-class of single-player gaming. Definitely sleep on Burial at Sea, however. Phew, glad to get that one off my chest. Next long video will be one relevant to material politics, which I'm super excited to do. And I have a few ideas for some shorter videos in between. Hope to see you in the next one, come what may.